Welcome back to Supreme Fuzzler. We are doing Venture Brothers, episode 11, past tense. This is going to be a very interesting episode that gives you a little more information about a lot of our characters that we have been introduced to in this show so far. And the last episode before we get into the stuff that is the season finale's information. And we opened it up with priest being like, "We commend thy body to the earth. Thank you, Father." And the priest stuff. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and earth to earth. He throws a dirt fucking pile on the coffin. So, you know. And then it shows Rusty and his crew, the Team Venture. And they're flying through the air and on the X1. And Rusty's complaining about how, like, why is it every time we try to go somewhere, I get distracted by jackassery? And then Dean explains how, like, we had to go to the Ant Kingdom. They needed our help. Help, Schmel, when the great reward was just a licked-up Jolly Rancher. It's so funny, like, how this show, it was in Are You There, God? It's Me, Dean, honestly, where they do the Johnny Quest thing, like, where there's adventures. Like, they're obviously just did an amazing, intense, crazy cool adventure. They even mentioned, the reward and how they had to fucking save the entire Ant Kingdom. And Hank is like, they gave us the key to their magic kingdom, enchanted kingdom, and have a tiny key. I wonder if he keeps that, or if he loses it. And then one of the things I like, there's Brock, and Brock who's a badass, and they mentioned how, like, he made special friends with their queen, cause Brock, well, he's Samson. Brock Samson. Slayer of men. Slayer of henchmen. Fighting him is just as bad as listening to the Beatles without earmuffs. So, it then goes into Rusty. He's trying to put his pants on. And he because he's a child and doesn't think about it, he accidentally pushes the lever of the X1 with his feet, which apparently, like, is a whole, like, slows them down, or for some reason it starts making the plane drop, and they literally end up crashing, and the front of the plane, like the little arrow thing of the plane pierces through the coffin that the priest was at, and has, like, a dead hand there, and he's like, oh god, it's a really great little bit. And fucking Rusty's like, sorry. Brock slaps his ass, the back of his head, actually, but it's because, damn it, Rusty, you're such a child. And then he asks that priest, he's like, Soriyama funeral? And the priest points up to the church on the hill, and he's like, it's okay, we didn't miss it. Fucking damn it, Rusty. It then cuts back in to the funeral now. We're inside the church. We got 4 ladies, question mark, in the back. Whatever. And it has Hank and Dean and the priest, a guy at the front, giving a little bit of a sermon and showing this guy who is apparently named Mike Soriyama. Hank asks, am I supposed to be sad about this? Like, do we know this guy? Is he family? And Rusty's like, nah, he's a guy we knew in college. And Dean mentions, oh, was that when you had hair? And Rusty's like, yeah, I had hair then. Some say too much. Which then it flashes back into Rusty talking to his dad. It's one of the first times, well, not the only, I think it's the second time we've third. Fuck, we've seen Jonas a few times. But it's a really good conversation. So it's Rusty talking about he hasn't cut his hair, basically, and Jonas doesn't want them to fight. And then he's like, well, no one calls me Rusty anymore. It's TS now. And then, as long as I can call you son. And then he hands the phone to Helper, and Rusty, like, hangs up and is like, God damn it, how does my dad always know when I'm in my room? And then we see Mike Soriyama, who is a younger, so they're all in college, they're college friends. And he's like, I want to pick his brain because I'm trying to get into robotics. And Rusty does the whole joke, this joke about, like, you want to get into robotics? I think Betamax is a better thing, because robotics is just going to be a fad. A neat little 80s, 90s joke about, like, you know, Betamax died. If anyone doesn't know what Betamax is, it was the VHS's rival, and it did not live. And then it has Rusty, like, checks the book that Mike Soriyama has, and I'm just gonna call him Soriyama, and is like, why are you doing Chem 1? Didn't you do that in high school? Like, no, I'm tutoring Leslie Cohen. Tutoring? You're doing her damn homework. Why? And then White comes in. He's like, it's because he's got a tiny, shiny chubby for her. And Hank's like, oh my god, you were there too? That's crazy. And it's like, yeah. And White's like, yeah, I was the DJ for the college radio and everything. Fucking, it's interesting to hear a little bit of White's backstory too. Previous college. And also how they finally explains, like, how White knows Rusty. And it's also neat to point out that this is the first time we've seen White without Billy. There's no Billy Quizboy here. And also, apparently, back in the college days, there was no Billy Quizboy. This is White alone, who was apparently Rusty's friend. And then Hank's like, so, okay, on, so you guys were roommates together? And Rusty's like, no, my roommate that year was a freshman. And it kind of flashes right back, and he's like, it's going to totally kill the vibe of Casa de Venture. Fucking Rusty. From what he said, he's never lost his virginity until 24, so I'm pretty sure he's still a virgin during that college thing he's talking about here. In fact, yes, I know that. He even talk about that in this episode. And so they talk about Rusty's roommate, and they finally are like, yeah, but I haven't met him yet, but his name's Brock Sampson. And Hank's like, oh my god, no wonder you guys are best friends. You guys have known each other since college. And Rusty's like, well, actually, I didn't really see much of Brock in those days. And it kind of has a fucking flashback where Brock has the upper bunk for some reason, and he's just fucking ladies. Like, and it shows clothes of 3 different pairs of different clothes, of ladies' clothes he banged, obviously. And just, it's so interestingly funny. And then the alarm clock goes off because Brock's apparently been fucking all night and he destroys the clock. A nice little flashback and a fun touch. It then has White, who cuts into this flashback, and is like, no, the guy who won the roommate lottery this year. Okay, they started me with this foreign exchange student, but he's like a prince or something. And speaking of dickweed, and this guy walks in, and then you hear Dean scream, bear and underbite. And White's like, yeah, you told him? And no, bear and underbite. And underbite walks in. And it's like, oh, okay, he was in your college too? Whoa. And was White's roommate? And then they flashes back to, then Hank's like, what was he like back in college? And fucking White's like, well, except for the metal jaw, pretty much the same. Total dick. And then shows them arguing, and fucking Underbite is basically doing the spiel of, like, I have a line in the room. You're supposed to keep your stuff on the other line. And don't think I haven't noticed that you've been moving the line a little bit further. I'll have to take this up in the next board room meeting. And he walks away, and he has Manservant, who we've seen before with Underbite, walking behind him. And then White and Rusty go off about his hair and how he looks like the Incredible Hulk from the 80s Incredible Hulk. And Soriyama pitches in about, like, we kind of have the same haircut. Why is his hair bad? And Rusty's like, oh, you're Chinese. You can't be blamed for what your hair does. And then Soriyama's like, I'm Japanese, dickweed. But yeah, you're so right. At least I don't have his jaw. Oh, and they also mentioned with Underbite how it's hollow ground and he won't attack because he respects the ground. And it's interesting how that's like a continuous thing, that they take the whole fucking Highlander thing. Although it might be from Knighthood. I'm not sure. I also want to say, they mention this whole time during the flashbacks, they're doing a whole, like, sitcom thing where they're having, like, the laugh tracks in the back and stuff. It's neat how they kind of give it, like, that 80s, 90s college show feel is what they're trying to do. And I forget that, so he actually says that at least they don't have his eyebrows. Soriyama does about Baron Underbite. And Rusty's like, oh, you want to see eyebrows? There's a guy in my creative writing class, No joke. They go out to here and they shows like really fucking long. And he does way too specific poems about monarch butterflies. And Hank's like, no way, you went to college with Monarch as well? Where'd you go? Super college or something? It's really funny to think about how they did go to a college where all these major characters in the series came together. But it's not exactly impossible. Rusty would naturally go, due to Jonas, would end up probably somewhere where considered the super science area, where the great heroes and villains all kind of congregate, because that seems to be what happens. Although, I guess from later series showing, it's more that's just kind of conveniently what this college ends up being. It's the outcasts and the freaks, and which end up being the villains and the heroes. Kind of. It's weird to say. I also want to say, okay, personally, here's a real quick theory here. Here, we're going to do a real quick theory, because this is something that's still not been explained in all of Venture. Why does Monarch hate Rusty Venture? From what I understand, the only people who know is probably Dr. Girlfriend and the Monarch. Maybe 21 at this point in late game series. I'm uncertain though. But okay. So the only thing we know about Monarch, like there's a few things that we learned about him. It's like, damn, it's hard to say without spoiling too much because we're not too deep. But okay, what I'm trying to say is, I think Rusty made fun of one of his poems or something of that nature in this creative writing class that they participated in. And that is why Monarch hates Rusty. And that is the core of his hatred. And to this day, he goes after him for that. I don't know this for certain, but that's my theory. I truly believe that this was the catalyst, because this is where, if I understand correctly, this is where they've met, technically. And then the priest, apparently Soriyama's last fucking wish was to have his college friends, which include Brock, to carry him. And the implication that even they've already given is Brock never was around. So it's odd that Brock's included in this picking up of Soriyama's body. So they go to pick him up, and fucking Rusty and White are weak, so they can't really pick up. I don't know why they didn't balance that by having Brock in one corner and Baron Underbite in the other corner, but no. And then, oh no, fucking wristbands attached to them, and they get flown out of there, and after they get sprayed with death gas, and then they get flown out of there, those four ladies in the bag walk away, and it's kind of weird because you kind of notice they look odd. And Hank is like, was that supposed to happen? And then goes to Monarch, shows the cocoon, and Monarch's like, no, not me. I got something planned for next week, but sorry. And Hank's like, nothing there. And Dean's going through the old photo albums. Hank's like, you're not a wartime connoisseur like me, which I think is a Godfather reference. And they're like, we gotta get the hover bikes out, get some plasma cannons. And Dean's like, no. We're just not grown up enough to handle this, Hank. We're gonna have to get some help. And so he shows the old picture of old Team Venture, Jonas's crew. And it's interesting, and it shows them, he calls them up, and he calls Colonel Gentleman, who is like a Sean Connery, James Bond, MI5 agent type of guy. Because he's not Bond as in Brock, who is obviously James Bond character. But he is fucking... And he's super flamboyant, and he also has, Kiki, fetch me my cane walking stick. And it shows little Kiki. And then it shows Kano, big Asian man, who was getting a massage, but apparently is called out for duty. And he picks up the girl who was massaging him, and then gives her a $50 bill or whatever the fuck, but does origami because he's a master of origami, because he's fucking cliche Japanese, but also just really cool. And then it shows the Action Man, the only one we've really interacted with up to this point. And oh shit! Before they show the Action Man, they show Otto Aquarius, who is the fish dude, who is apparently a Jehovah's Witness. And because he's a Jehovah's Witness, he really does not get used again, I will admit. He's barely in the series after this. But he is also part of old Team Venture. Then it shows the Action Man who's trying to put a belt on, and he's barely able to, and his wife is like, no, Rodney, no, you're gonna get yourself killed, and you're too old. And like, no, I gotta do it, I took an oath. Where are my knee pads? Where are my Action Man knee pads? What knee pads? My Action Man suit knee pads. It's so funny. It then shows those ladies we had seen earlier putting away the 4 knocked out characters: Brock, White, Underbite, and Rusty. And they get waken up with some smoke. The girls take off their nun outfits and reveal themselves into be like swimsuit outfits, but also cute girl face. We'll see. It'll be explained in a moment. Then they wake them up. Brock freaks out and tries to attack Underbite. Underbite's like, yes, of course, my plan was to get chained to an albino. This is totally my plan. So Brock's like, oh, of course. And then he was like choking Rusty, so Rusty's like, wait, a bodyguard. And then Sorayama comes out of the comes down from a TV, he's on the TV, and he's like, what up? I can't believe you all came to my funeral, son of a gun. And then it goes back to Old Team Venture. Old Team Venture comes in, they're basically, and it's great to introduce them, like Colonel General, MI5, RAF, so Royal Air Force, and also their MI5 fucking CIA agency shit. We spoke on the watch. And then Kano, that guy's hands are strong enough to crush a boulder, but delicate enough to crush a butterfly. And then Kano creates some origami. Otto Aquarius, last son of Atlantis. Salutations. And then Action Man, like, yeah, let's get to it then, man. We don't got time. And then Action Man just farts because he's an old man. It's funny to think about how he's just this. They really portray like these characters who were obviously grand adventuring super lords in their day. As you know, they're just doddering old characters now. Then we go back to the Sorayama and the crew. Sorayama has the robot ladies bring in apparently a last meal from the college from this college university, and like literally from the cafeteria, because he's a fucking freak who cannot get over his college years. And then Rusty's like, it's great to see you're alive, but what is this all about? Look at their faces, Rusty. They're what's all about, as reference to the robots. And Brock's like, Leslie Cohen? Really? Why? And even White was like, why would you make Leslie Cohen robots? And Underbite's like, to have sex with it, obviously. He was obsessed with her in college. And Rusty, who apparently knew Sorayama, and Rusty and White, assumably, were long-term friends of Sorayama's. And he was obsessed with Rose or whatever the fuck last year. Like, what the hell's the point? And Sorayama's like, I loved her. Leslie was different. Like, okay, well, why don't you just call her up, you big baby? Stop trying to torture us. What's wrong? Because of the restraining order. And because I just can't anymore. So brutal and funny. And then he's like, you guys, after what you guys did to me, basically, what Sorayama is. And Werner Underbite. I always forget his name's Werner with a V. He is like, what did we do to you? Like, oh, I'm glad you asked. I have a list and you're first. Villainy. And then it cuts to back to Old Team Venture, who are looking at the X1 and are kind of just reminiscing what memories that Queen of the Skies conjures. Okay, who stole your dad? Who dad then? And then they go off a bunch of like mystery stuff, like the old coffin guy. That it's interesting how they basically go off in an explanation of like their old adventures and how it could have been anyone. And then Hank and Dean are like, we don't really know. We just really want to find him. And then Colonel Gentleman's like, actually, that part's easy. Your dad placed a tracker in his molars when he was just a lad because he used to get kidnapped once a fortnight. And I think he was kidnapped one time during the robotic Mandingo. Which is like, what the fuck, Colonel Gentleman? And then you hear a pss, 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 Simba, hello, where are you? And then Orpheus kind of pops out from the side. And fucking Action Man and Old Team Venture are like, we're under attack! And they start shooting and attacking him, and Hank and Dean are like, oh no, he's our friend! And fucking Orpheus turns into snakes and shit, and turns the Action Man's pistols into snakes, and fucking does a whole illusion shit, and Hank and Dean stops them and everything, and stops the fight, and they're like, we know he looks like a Dracula, but he's actually a really cool guy. And Dean's like, I didn't know you could go invisible. I can't. I'm only able to obfuscate the eyes and make them perceive that they're snakes. Really, I was here the whole time. And he's got like a gunshot, obviously, on his right arm. Action Man's like, well, these aren't snakes, are they? And grabs the pistols to shoot him, and then Orpheus just like levitates them out of his hands, and then grabs his hands, or Action Man's hands, and fucking is like 2 years, 13 days from a stroke. I think it's 4 months and 13 days, something like that. But apparently it's spot on how long. It's brilliant. It's a fucking awesome little like foreshadow. It's an awesome little plaything. He's an old man, so a stroke makes sense, even though it's, I don't know. Intense, excuse me. It then goes back to the flashbacks. We got Underbite, who, despite being a total dickweed, according to Pete, is hanging out with them. Apparently, Underbite became a major friend of this four-man group. It's neat to think about how he actually was more hanging out with I would consider the hero side than the villain side. Although that's debatable considering Soriyama's current situation. So they're hitting a bong, which apparently it looks like the old Cylon from the original Battlestar Galactica. Not the ones from the 2000s, the one I know, but the ones from like the 70s or some shit. I forget when the original Battlestar Galactica came out. Anyways, just to show that they're nerds. They also showed a poster in the background at one point of Rusty's room, which showed it looks like Pink Floyd. Awesome little fun little tidbit and a neat foreshadow for Rusty's musical tastes in the future. So Soriyama hits this bong while the other three look on, and he's like, right, Underbite, that's how it rhymes, and he starts laughing, and you think he's stoned, but White points out it's oregano, we tricked you, haha, and apparently he's allergic to oregano, which you'd think, I guess you wouldn't ever ask for someone's allergies, but if White and Rusty have known him for at least a couple semesters, you think they know maybe that? I guess not. Again, I don't know if you'd tell anyone. I don't have any allergies, so I can't say whether or not I tell someone, my friends, if especially as I'm going to know them, my allergies, unless it came up, unless like they were cooking for me, or if they were thinking of cooking for me, or getting something for me. I don't know, but at the same time, I could see stories, tell a story about when you had oregano fuck you up. Maybe you would know. Then again, would you remember that story and remember that they were allergic? I don't know. In any case, he almost dies, apparently. And Soriyama's like, that was not funny, I almost died. Damn it. He also says, more importantly, I had to cancel my tutoring date with Leslie, which is like, dude, you could have died is definitely way more important. You are way over-obsessed. And then Baron Underbite freaks out and is like, I will tell you no more of this, and then shoots his jaw literally out of his jaw and hits a fucking robot and kills one of the Leslie robots, but then the other Leslie robot tases him and puts him down. Fun little bit of action. And Soriyama's like, anyone else want to test my robots? And interesting, he also shows Brock a look at the jaw that's now on the ground because they don't pick it up for whatever reason. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna grab that. And then cuts back to the X1 with the old Team Venture in the seat. It also has Action Man without his helmet on, which is one of the few times you see that. I can't actually think of any, other than his first episode that he has shown with the Ashes to Ashes. There's very few times that I can think of that he does not have his damn helmet on. Anyways, his name's Rodney, by the way, which we learned in this episode. Hank and Dean comment how it's weird to see someone else in the cockpit, which is an intriguing thing to think about. Because, to them it's weird, but because Rusty and Brock have always been piloting the X1 since they were kids, and basically for all their adventures in their lives. But from what we can gather, Kano specifically has been, but also just in general, old Team Venture have been piloting that X1 they did it for decades and decades. Throughout the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, this plane was under fucking Rusty's control. And all that shit. Colonel Gentleman does a little comment of despite his racial handicap, Kano is a crackerjack pilot. Which is, I understand, is a reference to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, because it's a movie they really like. The writers of Venture Brothers, Jason Publica, Doc Hammer, and the rest. Which I think does those two mostly. which I'll get into them at some point. The writers, voice actors, and other such things that make this show great. But for now, it then goes over to Hank and Dean talking to the Otto Aquarius, the Atlantis guy, and they're like, "Hey man, you're obviously not as old. You don't look as old as the rest. What's going on there?" And he's like, "I am just as old as them. I just don't age as much because I'm half Atlantean." And Hank's like, "How do I get to be one of those?" And fucking Action Man's like, "A drunken sailor has to have their way with your mermob, kid." So fucking great. And then, of course, Otto Aquarius is like, "If you're interested in some longer lasting life, I got something for you." And it gives him the fucking eternal life Jehovah's Witness God brochure shit. It's funny to see that Hank and Dean are like, "What the hell is this?" It's interesting to see that, because despite them being sheltered and totally like out of touch, obviously because they barely understand what religion is, they're smart enough, or at least have been taught and to be against. I don't know if against it's the right word for it, and that's the way I want to say it. They're just so unaware of religion and so aware of the scientific side that it's foreign to them to be offered that kind of thing, when it's interesting to think about, because in our world, in our knowledge, it's kind of common. I haven't been handed pamphlets and brochures for religion, specifically Christianity crap, fucking quite dozens of times in my life, and that is weird when you think about how I not gone to a church since I was like 15. It's just like at the plaza for the bus, or walking down the street even, or at the mall and places like that, and that's where it happens, and it's just common for us. But for these kids, these teenagers, and I mean common for us even by the time I was in my 16s, like, because I did go to church a bit, I knew and understood that. But that's the point. It's so common for our culture and our people that seeing someone who isn't aware of that is neat. They bust into a college dorm where the dude's like, "What the hell?" And Action Man grabs this kid and is like, "Watch your language, kid." And they go over and find a tooth underneath the bed that obviously the tracker is going towards. And Colonel Gentleman's like, whoa, Rodney, we don't need to kick his ass. This is obviously where Rusty went to college. And Action Man's like, "Oh yeah, Jonas had us move his stuff in here back in the day." And then they're like, to Hank and Dean, like, "Do you remember anything else? Anything else you haven't told us?" And like, "We went to the funeral of Mike and then the kid is like, "Soriyama? Professor Soriyama? If he died, why am I busting my ass on this term paper?" And then Action Man just does a fart. Dude, you beefed. It's interesting how the writers have written Action Man into that old man, but fucking ravaging, kick-ass Captain America murderer kind of character. Older Brock kind of thing, yeah, but not, because he's fucking insane. I think Colonel Gentleman's one of my favorites too. Old Team Venture are great characters. I don't consider them the best that the show has to offer, but they're high caliber, fun characters that I enjoyed learning more about, because they are important and integral to Rusty's backstory. Learning about them is key to Rusty, everything about them. Because what we have to remember and understand is that Rusty had interactions with these people since his boyhood days and throughout his entire life. Even up to, they literally helped him move his shit into the college dorm that he lived in. Literally, up to his leaving into college, these people were involved in his life. So their personalities and the way they interact with people and the way they are with Rusty are important in understanding who Rusty is as a character and everything about them. And then it goes to a flashback again with Mike Soriyama and Rusty chilling with Pete White on the air, on the radio, because if you remember, he was a radio host of the College of DJ. He's like, "I have a message from Mike Soriyama to Leslie Cohen. Leslie, I masturbate furiously to your picture every night. Please notice me." And fucking Rusty, it's great. Rusty laughs in the flashback, and then in the fucking future, he's still laughing again. And Soriyama mentions while Rusty's laughing, is, "Laugh while you can. You're the one who betrayed me the most, Rusty." And then it also shows Brock like breaking the chain of his chain, I guess. with Underbite's jaw. It then cuts back to the Action Man and the crew, the old Team Venture. Action Man's like, the old fake coffin trick. Gadzooks, you think I would have remembered that from the old mystery of the fake coffin? And so old Team Venture does a whole plan where Odo knocks on the door and is like, do you have a moment to talk about the Lord? And the robot lady's like, and then the three run in there and destroy the fuck out of them. Straight wreck them, the three Team Venture. And after they destroy them, they do, go Team Venture, and it shows like a cool ass symbol and just awesome freaking graphics, and Hank is like, you see, that's how it's done, and it's freaking amazing. It's a brilliant part of the episode, and a great showing of how cool those characters are. Also how mediocre Otto Atlantis, unfortunately, is. Alright, and then it flashes back to, again, this time they're doing D&D, the four of them. I once again want to point out that Werner Underbite is there. It's intriguing again that he was part of this group, so like really part of this group. And apparently, so they're doing D&D, and Rusty, well, first Werner's like, I swing my +3 battle axe, and Sorayama, who's apparently the dungeon master, is like, no, the Leslie Golem smooth face is impenetrable. And you're like, what's a Leslie Golem? It's a golem. It looks exactly like Leslie Cohen. And Rusty's like, oh, it looks like her, huh? I'll seduce her. I have like 25 charisma points, which I think is the outro's little quote that they use. I want to seduce her. And so he rolls, and apparently it works, and it's great. Future Rusty's like, oh, come on, you're going to kill me because I had imaginary sex with a girl in the D&D game? And he's like, don't try to pretend to be coy, Rusty. What about the next morning? And it flashes back again, and it shows Leslie getting down, which we're assuming actually is from Brock's room, Brock's bed, not Rusty's, and coming out of the room, and Mike's like about to knock on the door, and so they run into each other, and he's like, oh my god, and she's like, shh, he's still sleeping, be quiet, bye Mike. And so, and Rusty's like, oh no, that's no way, I didn't lose my virginity until I was 24, confirming, by the way, what I was thinking, and how he's still a virgin during this time. It must have been Brock. And then he shows Brock, who's using the jaw now, because he's kind of escaped. I don't know how Sorayama missed that. Broke the fucking, the door thing, the, like, scanner, and opens the gate, and runs away. And, and Sorayama calls the Leslie bots, which it shows Team Venture, who was getting into the Leslie bots' outfit, apparently, because they're going to do a whole, disguise thing. And then Sorayama explains like this is going to be a fitting in for that bully, because apparently you guys remember because you were there, because it was our last D&D game. We didn't know, and this is when we finally get explained. We finally get Brock's backstory, Brock's true backstory of what we saw in Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Magic, honestly, where he got kicked off the football team because he killed Tommy the quarterback, and he got drunk that night and came home as Brock from. It's funny because Brock from the past, they do a whole cutting from Brock to the past and Brock in the future, and Brock in the future is like fucking just as mad ladding because he fights old Team Venture, because old Team Venture, they apparently don't know each other, despite I just don't believe that possible, considering that they must have met Brock. But Brock's a mad monster, and they are disguised, and those guys are old men. So they do a whole cutting away where Brock does the same thing he does to Rusty White and Werner and Mike Sorayama to the four members of Old Team Venture: Kano, Gentleman, Action Man, and Otto Aquarius. And he wrecks them all up. He punches Action Man's fucking teeth out, his dentures, and which also is where Rusty loses his tooth. So with the tracking, that's why the whole tracker tooth was in that dorm. Actually, it's really an interesting little tidbit. And then they also had, like, the last thing that happens is him throwing Auto Aquarius, which also is Mike Soriyama out the window, but Aquarius through a wall and right into Soriyama, old man Soriyama. And Rusty's like, oh my god, finally, I gotta see this. King's great because Hank and Dean are like, those were our friends, Brock. For to Old Team Venture, they were helping us rescue you guys. Oh, I'm kind of sorry. And Kano is trying to do an origami, but then he just stops and just flips him off. It's funny. Kano's a mute, by the way. The guy doesn't talk. He has not spoken. The big Asian guy. Well, and then it has Brock walk over through the broken wall, and he finds that Soriyama's a robot, and his head's been knocked off. I'm just gonna keep that in. I don't care. And that he is apparently not there. And Dean's like, I think I know where the real one's hiding, and opens what's obviously a casket. And boom, and Brock Even's like, well, Dean pukes first. Brutal. But Brock Even's like, he really did die. That's interesting. And Rusty is like, so he programmed his robots to hate us too? Makes about as much sense as anything. Well, let's get out of here before he starts to stink. And so they leave. Rusty's family and they all leave, and it's great. One of the last things is Pete White, who's still chained up, and is like, Rust, huh? So fucking funny. After the outro, we have Brock. The flashback again. Brock is. We're back in the past, and young Brock's packing up, and he's like, I lost my scholarship because I was kicked out of the football team, so I'm going to join the army. Which is most likely what pivots him into what his career that ends up where he is in Venture Time. And one of the last things he says, though, is like, oh yeah, someone from Venture Industries called, your dad died. And he walks out. And it's interesting how this is the timeline. Assumably this is because Rusty's, I think, a senior at this point in college, assumably. His dad dies right here, while Brock goes and joins the army, while Soriyama gets wrecked up. Assumably, the underbite thing is coming soon, where he loses his jaw, which is weird. It's interesting. Really interesting. This episode is fantastic. Really is a fantastic episode. I actually did not give it as much credit as I should have in my last episode. It is not as funny as Tag Serial yet, but as I was watching it again, I realized I really like the Old Team Ventures characters. I really enjoy the little Orpheus bit that they do in here. It's really fun, and how important that is actually for a foreshadow thing. I enjoy all the information that it gets. Brock's backstory and the setup for him. It gives the first Jonas Ventures death kind of timeline. It gives you Rusty as a college kid, not as Boy Rusty, which I don't think we've seen Boy Rusty yet, but they've hinted at. Oh, yes, we have. We've seen Boy Rusty a few times. So, it's just it's interesting to think about how much character they built here. They also give us a bit of White, which was really fun, and even Underbite, and even Monarch, although he was not really a participant in this episode. He literally had one personal line, a couple lines, but one scene that involved him, and it was just him being like, nope, got something planned for next week. And yet his character was really, I think that's why I say, I think this nonchalant mention of him is the catalyst and telling of us what is, with a little more information from later seasons. I think this is why he hates Venture. Right here, something happened in that writing class, in my opinion, that made him hate Rusty. I think Rusty made fun of one of his poems or something about monarch butterflies, personally. That's my theory. I'm throwing it out there. I don't know if that's ever going to be explored, considering all we have is a movie coming, but I am whatever. Thank you guys for joining me. This is Supreme Fuzzler. Hit me up anywhere you listen to your podcast. Also, check me out on YouTube. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you guys. Have a good day, and goodbye. Go Team Venture.